Okay, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Still analyze a full game, but this time it's going to be a recent game, and this was from actually a very recent game. This was from the Hungarian Championship, which just concluded the other day. Featured a lot of great games, a lot of fighting games, which were over in 30 or 40 moves, which is sort of rare, I think, for players of this caliber, international masters and grandmasters. Um, and yeah, so a lot of the games that were played in this tournament were pretty exciting, and they have a really good instructional value. This was just a game I selected because I liked it a lot, and it had a lot of concepts that I've gone over in other videos, and sort of it showed a coherent and strong strategy for White, which paid off. Um, so let's see. The players of this game were playing White was Gabor Nagy, who is a strong international master, very young player. I don't know, maybe he's like 16 or 17 or something like that. So he's far from his peak. And playing black is Horvath, who here it says 25-31. And I think that he's an international master and not a grandmaster, but obviously he has a grandmaster's rating, so he's a very strong player. So let's see how this game went. White opened with d4, knight f6, c4, and already black played a strange move order with the move to b6. So normally, if he wanted to play an opening with the queenside fianchetto here, he would play the move to e6, and then if white plays the move knight to f3, black will play b6, and we are in the queen's Indian defense here in the starting position of that opening. It's important to note that if white plays knight c3, this strategy is not to be recommended anymore, because after b6, white can play e4, and he's already better. Black can't really fight for the center in the way he'd like to, and white will probably play the move e5 on the next move and kick black's knight somewhere. So after the move knight c3, black chooses to play either bishop to b4, preventing e4. And this is the Nimzo Indian defense. d5, which is the queen's gambit declined. We've transposed. And then the third move would be c5, which would go for a Benoni after d5, take, d6, and we're in the position for the modern Benoni. Okay, so that's just a brief word on what could happen otherwise. So black played this move to b6, and now white played the move knight to f3. Of course, knight to c3 was perfectly playable. Bishop b7 would be the response there, I think. And then white could try to transpose to something else by playing knight f3, and after e6 we'd be back into the queen's Indian. He could also try to play the move d5, which is a similar idea to what he plays in the game, to try and take over the center with e4 and block the bishop on b7. Okay, but instead white played knight f3, so he's signaling that he's happy to go back into the queen's Indian defense after e6. But black played bishop to b7 in this game, and white played the move g3. So once again, he's telling black that he's happy to go back into the queen's Indian defense, because after the move e6, transposing, g3 would be the main line. So he's prepared for that after this move g3. But black does not play e6 here. He plays g6. So he's signaling that he wants to fianchetto the other bishop. Okay, white completes his fianchetto. Black does likewise. Both sides castle. And now we should stop at this position and talk about what's going on. What are the different strategies being employed here by both sides? Well, white's strategy has been pretty clear and classical. I mean, he would like to play the move e4 eventually, and take over the whole center, which black has basically given him. But black's strategy is not stupid at all. He's hanging back with the pawns, not committing himself to any particular pawn structure, and just waiting for events to proceed. And this is like the first critical moment of the game, I would say, because white has a pretty wide choice of what to do here. The normal natural move, I think, would be knight c3. And I think black normally in this position would play the move knight e4. And the idea of that is that if he exchanges off a pair of knights, he has more space for his pieces. He's opened up both of the bishops. And after knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, we see that white would like to play e4, but there's a bishop there, so it will take him several moves to try and engineer that. And in the meantime, black will probably play something like c5 also to attack the white center in conjunction with this bishop on g7, and the knight could come out to c6. So black's strategy is pretty logical and coherent there, I would say. So that could explain why white played a different strategy here. He played the move d5. And just like in the position before, the idea is basically the same. He wants to shut out the bishop on b7. He wants to take over the center completely with e4 at some point. And so he starts this out by taking away the d5 square from black. Now black cannot play d5 himself, and so it'll be harder for him to fight against the d5 and e4 squares in that way. Okay, but there are downsides to this move. And the main downside, I would say, is that the pawn on d5 could be a target for black either with the move c6 or e6. And black has a few options in this position. Let's look at what he can do before we get to the game move. He could still play knight e4 here. And the point is that, well, white didn't play knight c3, and now black says, well, now you can't play knight c3 because I'm going to take and win a pawn. And the knight in the center could be annoying for white in other ways. He can't play e4 for a period of time now. And so he would try to shift that knight probably either with knight d2 or queen to c2 or something like this, queen to d3 maybe. So that would be one option. Alternatively, black could play the move knight to a6. And this has the idea that he would like to move the knight to c5 in order to control the e4 square. Let's go back to that position. He would like to move that knight to c5 on the next turn. And so if white played knight c3, black could play knight c5, and now I think white would do well to play knight to d4. The idea being that now he opens up this bishop, so he's really threatening to play e4 now. And also he's prevented black from chipping away at the center with c6 because he has too much protection on that square right now. So that would be another idea for black. In the game, he played a pretty straightforward idea with e6. So he's just saying to white that he wants to challenge the center immediately before white can play knight c3 and e4. So it's a logical idea. And white definitely should not take this pawn on e6. That would totally defeat the purpose of what he's been trying to do. And after f takes e6, black would have two center pawns and a really good position already. Very active position, no bad pieces. So that would not be advisable for white at all. So in the game, he played the right move, which is knight to c3, developing a piece, and now protecting the pawn on d5 and preparing to play e4. Okay, black played knight a6 in the game. Another idea he could have played is d6 to try and get the knight out via d7 and then to c5. White would have a couple of options here. He could play the move knight d4 again to try and use the g2 bishop to protect d5, and also white is threatening this pawn now. And if black pushed it on, then after knight c2, white would have a good version of the King's Indian defense. The bishop on b7 here is misplaced. He's ready to play e2 to e4 at some point, and his knights are quite good. This knight on c2 could come around to e3 later, and it's actually a good square for the knight because black wants to play f5 at some point, and the knight would protect against that, and it's in a centralized location. So that would not be a bad position for white at all after e5, knight c2. Instead of that, black could play the move queen e7, but of course the downside of that move is that white can play the move e4 immediately if he'd like. Also, in a couple of these positions, after d6, for example, white could also try bishop to g5. And after the moves knight d4, queen e7, the bishop g5 idea is also viable. So white has a lot of ways he could play the position. Personally, I prefer playing with e4. I think that's the most consistent, and it just looks like a strong strategic plan to me. Okay, so going back now, he did not play d6 here. He played the move knight a6 immediately. Okay, and white went forward with his idea with e4. Why not? Black has allowed him to play his main strategic idea, so he goes for it. And the black position is a little bit difficult here. White is probably threatening to play the move e4 to e5 and take over even more space. And the pawns in the center look pretty strong there if we had that pawn duo on d5 and e5. So black really has to react energetically, I would say here, and accurately, because one wrong move and he could end up in a very bad position. And in fact, he did end up in a pretty bad position here quite quickly. One move that he could have played here is d6. I think this is probably the move I would choose if I had this position with black, because I really don't like the white pawn going to e5 like that, and it seems to generate quite a large initiative. I still think white has an advantage here with any number of moves, but the move d6 looks logical anyway to try and control the square e5. Instead, he played the move knight to c5, which is pretty uncompromising, but at the same time, he's allowing white to kick his pieces around the board with e5. So we can see that white has an initiative here, and he's gotten this initiative just by playing very natural moves. He played totally understandable and principled moves in the opening. The one move that most people might not play was that move d5, but once we see the point behind it and why it's strategically justified, then I think it makes a lot of sense. And so that's another reason why I wanted to show this game, is how white uses the initiative and positional ideas together to improve his position. So he's gotten the positional superiority, and now he starts to use that in a dynamic way by creating immediate threats and then using the time that he gains with these threats. Like, for example, in this position, he gains time because he's attacking the knight on f6. He uses the time that he gains with those threats to develop his pieces and create more threats in some cases. So black plays the move knight g4 now. Okay, obvious what his intentions are. He wants to take the pawn on e5, and white just very calmly plays bishop to f4, protecting that pawn. And white knows that this knight on e5 is going to be a problem piece for black as soon as he's able to play the move h3, because that knight is going to have to go to the edge of the board on h6, where it's totally inactive and could easily be shut out from the game. So one thing that happened in this game already, I would say, is that black lost the fight for the center. He lost the fight for the squares d5 and e5 especially. They're occupied by pawns. And that's sometimes one of the downsides to playing a hyper-modern strategy like this, is if you don't counter in the center at the right time, or you just don't get that counter in for one reason or the other, you can easily find yourself short of space and get pushed off the board. But I'm not singling the black player out in this game. He's a very strong player, and we all have games where for one reason or another we get a bad position. So this game is more instructive than anything else. Definitely not trying to criticize anybody's play here, though. So after bishop to f4, it's quite difficult for black to do much in terms of counterplay because of white's spatial superiority and his control of the center. So he played the move e takes d5, which that can make some sense. He's probably trying to get the white pawn to go to d5 and then somehow attack it or attack one of these pawns here, and that certainly makes sense. I mean, he has to fight back against these pawns, or like I said, he'll just get pushed off the board. So he played e takes d5. Another thing he could have tried to do, even though it's very risky, is to play d6. I mean, sometimes when you have a position that you judge to be worse for you, or where it looks like, if you don't react actively, you could end up in a lost position quickly or something like that. It's sometimes a good idea to muddy the waters a little bit and try to make things very unclear, because your opponent might not find the best continuation, and that could be your way to save the game, or at least create some opportunities for you to take advantage of. And I think the move like d6 does that. It gives white a lot of options, and maybe he'll choose the wrong one, or the suboptimal one, and then black could maybe have some chances to get back and cause white some problems. So I think d6 is a good practical try. Okay, so black played the move e takes d5, and now white started to use his initiative more. So first of all, he takes the time out to play h3. It's a good intermediate move, because now the knight has to go to the edge of the board. Pressure on e5 has gone away, and the knight is in an inactive position. Okay, and now he plays another move to gain time, bishop to g5. So he's improving his pieces with each move. The f6 square could be very weak at some point. This square is a hole because the e pawn and the g pawns have moved, so a pawn can never protect it. And this move has a tactical point too, which is that after f6, black would be losing material because white could take it. The bishop cannot take because the knight would be hanging, so he would be forced to take with the rook, but he's going to lose material like this also, as we can see. So the move f6, which would be positionally desirable, because this e5 pawn is really annoying for black to deal with, and it takes up a lot of space and prevents his pieces from being active. He'd like to trade that off, but tactically white has prevented that. So that means that black will have to move the queen somewhere, and he chose the square e8. It's difficult to choose a square for the queen because none of them look particularly pleasant to go to. c8, b8, or e8 looks like, for example, if he plays the move queen to c8, then it looks like knight takes d5 is just very, very strong. First of all, white is threatening this fork, and also the knight could be useful here at some point. So if black were to take this, after c takes d5, white has two bishops and a very strong pawn center, and these knights are going to get kicked around or just be inactive. I mean, white could also play the move g4 eventually, and then the knight can't come to f5, and he could play the move b4 to kick the knight on c5 around. So this is a really, really unpleasant position for black to be in. Okay, so in the game he played queen to e8, and now white had the opportunity to take on d5 again with the knight. I'm not sure why he didn't go for this, because this looks stronger than his move. His move is still good. C takes d5 is still a good move. White still has a big advantage, but I think knight takes d5 is the stronger move, because once again, if black plays bishop takes d5 after c takes d5, white has total control of this position. Black can't take this pawn because the knight would hang, and white will play rook e1 and shadow the queen and the usual b4 ideas, and white's just going to slowly improve his pieces, something like this. And black just has a lot of weaknesses. He has no active plan, and so his position will just deteriorate further and further as white makes useful moves. Okay, so the other thing is that after knight takes d5, white is threatening to take the pawn on c7. And so if black tried to defend that with rook c8, then he's going to lose that rook, lose the exchange there to the knight. So there's really not an awful lot of options for black here. If he plays the move knight e6 to protect c7 and attack the bishop on g5, then white could play bishop takes h6, and now he's going to fork the king and queen. And that would work against rook c8 also, incidentally. So he could take here too, and that would be good too, I think. Maybe there's bishop takes d5. Take. Yeah, so actually maybe black gets away in this variation. So actually maybe bishop takes h6 doesn't work there. I don't know, you can put it on a computer or something. But in any case, he would lose the exchange after rook c8. So basically, the point is that knight takes d5 is just looking like basically winning for white in all lines. I mean, strategically winning at the very least after this continuation with bishop takes and c takes. Okay, the material is technically even if we go by points or whatever, but the position and white's activity and black's passivity speak for themselves. Okay, so white took back with the c pawn here. Okay, and now black played the move a5. So the point of this was just that he did not want white to be able to kick this knight away and make his other knight go to the side of the board, like what happened with the h6 knight. So black plays the move a5. Queen d2 was played. Okay, so that move has a definite threat, right? He's going to threaten to take the knight. Another move that white could consider was rook e1. I like the look of this move because white's in no rush, first of all, and anytime you can put your rook like this, shadowing the queen, you can create a lot of threats at some point doing something like this, just because white's position will be good tactically also. So there should be a breakthrough here at some point. And also you prevent black from playing moves like d6 or f6 at some point, because white could take that and then the rook will be attacking the queen. So you just sort of keep black tied down, and you bring another piece into the game. Queen d2 is a good move too, though. Okay, knight f5, and now white gains even more time. So this is a really good example of how to use the initiative, which is that with every move you make a threat, with every move you gain time, and you can keep improving your position with these threats, and making it so that each time your opponent retreats, you can bring out a new piece or just make some progress in some way. And white's obviously done that. His pieces have been put into more aggressive positions over the last few moves. And so actually his play here stemming from queen d2 is very thematic, right? Because rook e1 actually doesn't threaten anything immediately. It's just sort of a very uncomfortable, slow type of move. But white played in a very thematic style with the initiative to make a threat with every move and gain more time. Okay, so black plays the move knight to e7. And now I think this move rook e1 was strong again. And this time actually there is a threat, which is that white wants to play the move d6. And black would not want to take that because white would take back with the e pawn, and the knight would be pinned to the queen, so black would just lose material there. So rook fe1 would be very annoying to deal with. Yeah, it just looks very, very difficult for black here. I'm trying to find something that he can do to try and get out of this, but it's quite difficult. Instead, white played the move bishop to f6, which is a logical move too, because black has weakened a lot of these dark squares with his moves. e6 and g6 weakened the f6 and h6 squares. So if white exchanges the dark squared bishops, then the dark squares will be even weaker, and he reasons that it will be even easier to attack or make threats when the bishops are exchanged. So it's a logical move. Black played the move h6. He was trying to prevent something like queen to h6 eventually, or queen to g5, something like this maybe to eventually, I don't know. So he plays his move h6. Okay, and now white plays rook fe1. Okay, and now the bishop on f6 is immune from capture due to the pin. King h7 was played. So now white could have struck again with the move d6, now that that rook has been put on e1. And now the point is that if black takes on d6, white can throw in this capture first and then take, and it's the same story as before. Black will lose material due to the pin. And if he doesn't take, then he will lose the pawn on c7. And it's not really just the pawn on c7 that's the problem. The problem is that white is threatening to play this maneuver, which is really, really, really strong, and would just be dominating the position there. So that would have been very difficult for black to deal with. Okay, white played the move knight to d4 instead. So his idea, I think, is he wants to play here eventually and attack c7. The bishop is now defending the pawn on d5, so d6 could be even stronger at some point. And maybe his idea was to play f4 and f5 eventually and open the king up too. So this move has a few ideas, I think. It's a strong move. Okay, knight g8 was played. So this was black's defensive plan. He was trying to regroup his pieces in order to get rid of this bishop on f6 and protect his king at the same time. Okay, so white played the move g5 now. And he's trying to open up the king and dissuade black from taking on f6, because if he took on f6 here, then I think the move g takes f6 would just be really, really strong. And those pawns are not going anywhere, and neither is this knight on g8. So white would have free reign to just improve his position there after that. Okay, and if black took this pawn, then I think queen takes g5 would be very strong. And there's some strong attacking ideas here. You know, the rook could come in eventually. I know the knight is protecting that square, but white could always try to exchange it with knight there, and you know the queen could come back and check, and then white can bring his pieces as he sees fit. Basically, he can bring his pieces over as he sees fit. So black didn't really want to open up his king, which is understandable, so he played the move d6. The problem is that this rook on e1 is now going to have its say in the game. But I can understand why he played this move, because he doesn't want to stay tied down forever, and he's trying to make the position unclear. And in a practical game, when you have a bad position, you have to do that. So white now played the move. Bishop takes g7, the king took back, and now he takes here. So he's basically won a pawn. The rook is attacking the queen, and after the queen moves, he takes another pawn. Okay, black has to do something about this, so he takes back. And now white finds a nice tactical sequence based on forcing moves. So a lot of this game has been based on just forcing moves, creating these threats that have moved black's pieces away from their ideal locations. Okay, white took now with check. Black tried to get his knight back into the game here. And now strong move d6 was played. The idea is that if the queen takes, then knight takes e6 check. I'm not takes, just a check. And the king is in check, and discovered attack on black's queen. So black would be losing material there. So he played the move queen to d8. Yeah, the other options weren't really too great either. If he played queen to d7, then rook e7 would be very, very strong. Black will lose material here. Queen takes d6, knight e6 check is the same thing as before. So he played queen d8. And now white found a nice forcing sequence of moves again. So he took the bishop and played rook e7. Okay, so, well, let's see here. What happens if black plays knight takes d6? Because the knight is attacked, and that pawn was really annoying for black, and now the rook on e7 is attacked. Well, unfortunately, it's the same problem as before with knight e6 check. And here we have a family fork, thanks to the rook on e7 pinning the pawn. So black would lose there. And the knight's attacked, so he has to do something about that. If he played the move, well, if he played the move rook b8, then knight e6 check again. So that's really the big threat. So he played the move knight c5 to get the knight out of the attack and control the e6 square. Okay, and now white found a nice way to continue attacking. He played the move queen f4. So he's protecting his pawn on d6, and I think what he would like to do is probably move this knight to d5 and somehow use the f6 square eventually. He's just going to continue bringing his pieces into the attack. Okay. And yeah, I mean, there's once again, it's difficult to find a move for black, because if he played rook e8, then white has the strong move knight c6, and the queen is actually quite short of squares here. Queen actually only has one square, which is on c8, but now that would allow d7. Sorry, not d7. White could play the move queen e5 check, for example, if he wanted to. King moves back, and now he could play rook here. That seems to do it. There's probably stronger options too from this position. Okay. So yeah, let me just get rid of that d7 variation. Okay. So knight c5, queen f4, queen c8. And now he plays d7. So the idea is clear that he's trying to get this knight away from protecting the e6 square. And black doesn't really have too many options here. If he plays queen d8, then knight c6 would actually trap his queen basically, and he would lose material there. So knight takes d7 was played, but this allows a very nice tactical finish. Knight e6 check, forking the king and the rook. King h7, because he also had to protect the knight on h6 after this check. And now knight takes f8 check. He can't take with the queen because he would just lose another knight. He would just lose the knight. So he takes with the knight. And now white brings another piece into the attack, very strong. Knight to e4, coming to g5 or f6. And so throughout the game, white has really not given black any time to breathe. Just has kept the pace pretty fast here. Okay, knight e6 was played. Queen e5. Okay, so now he's preparing to play knight f6 check, and then the king will have to move either to g7 or h8, and there will be a discovered check based on the queen being on that diagonal. So black plays queen to c4, and now white finds a pretty nice way to finish with rook takes e6. So if he takes with the queen, knight g5 forks the king and the queen, and if he takes with the pawn, then he has to worry about knight f6. If king h8, then knight h5 check, or you can move it to e8 also. King g8 or king h7, and queen g7 would be checkmate. If he moves to g7, then I think knight h5 check again, and let's say, I mean, king f8 or king f7 comes to the same thing really, because, and white has a choice about what he wants to do here. He could take here and play this and win the rook, or he could go for the checkmate immediately and finish the game like that. So yeah, that was this game basically, and good illustration.